Thanks, Amy, and thanks to Archer. Great to have some ragtime blues to bring us into this, hopefully, this start of a new culture for housing in Daylesford. I mean, I shouldn't say the start. There's always been alternative housing arrangements here in town, but for me, having spent so much time really putting the property lobby on the back foot. It's great to be in a progressive community like Hepburn Shire, where knowledge of the commons still exists, where environmental principles are still so powerful, where permaculture had its roots. So I'm really excited about helping this transition occur away from this situation where we're consumers of planet Earth and towards one where we can be custodians. And it really begins with how we treat the land and how that plays out in these ginormous payments we make each and every week when it comes to our land and housing payments. I had a saying a few years back that if paying our rent, if paying our mortgage is our number one financial priority, why isn't affordable housing government's number one priority? And too often we see millions and millions of dollars in first home buyers grants and now stamp duty subsidies that are totalling up to $730 million here in Victoria. And anyone who's put their geek hat on and had a look at how those grants play out in society, if everyone gets $10,000, then we compete with each other and it pushes prices up. So it's actually a seller's subsidy. So couldn't we use that money so much more effectively? And hopefully with our work in the advocacy space, we're putting in a lot of hard yards, doing the government submissions and trying to get them to recognise that there is a better way to, A, use the money that is supposed to help us, and B, level the playing field so that property investors don't have so many goddamn advantages, because it is absolutely maddening. And I call it a workplace hazard, opening up the AFR and reading day after day what I call peak earnestness. Politicians, Dan Andrews with his recent housing statements, sounding so earnest. He was going to make a difference. But if you look at the detail, really, they were just, tinkering at the edges, not doing as much as they should have. And meanwhile, those who read the fine print, who owned property within, I think it was 800 metres of a train station, had automatic rezoning enabled, and the champagne corks would have been flying that night. So let's hope we can and start to use community land trusts as a real-life demonstration of what happens when people come together with a dedicated model to make a difference in their own community. So this is what we're going to go through today. Hepburn as a hotspot, the CLT 101s, some challenges, local issues in Daylesford, and then next steps. Okay, so this is what we basically have going on. World's so busy running around trying to do things, but they don't actually recognise that they're being played by monopolists. And to see, I'm so happy that my daughter Jamari's here, but to see my kids sitting around playing the Melbourne Monopoly board game, and it's teaching them how to privatise and sell the 12 Apostles, Federation Square, and the MCG. It's all being primed for this being normal. And so these things just slide in through culture and emanate into this world that there is no other alternative. This is the way forward. And so I'm lucky to have spent 20 years looking at economic history, looking at classical economics. A lot of people are up in arms about neoliberal, but for me, the big change happened when we moved from classical to neoclassical economics. And back in the 1880s, people would go and hear someone like me speak for 2 to 3 hours, hardcore economics. Then they would go home and have lunch. Then they would come back for 90 minutes to 2 hours of Q&A, and they'd really get stuck into it in a town hall discussion. So our economic literacy, we all like to think that voting once every 3 or 4 years delivers freedom, but it sure doesn't feel that way on a Friday night when I look in my wallet and it's goddamn empty and I can't do what I want to do. So we need to have an economic democracy where we're all shareholders of planet Earth, not just the wealthy. So here we are in Daylesford. This is from the Valuer General of Victoria, and over 10 years you can see the darkest navy blue there between the Alpine Shire and Hepburn were the two municipalities that suffered 100% plus price changes over a decade. And when we know that wages barely jump 2% a year, if you were lucky enough to have a full-time job, 20% versus 100%, treadmill has accelerated enormously. And we're dancing on a hot tin roof trying to keep up with this. And goodness me, if you're in the gig economy, you're really struggling. We've seen this week that the new rental affordability index is out. And this big giant tree change we've seen during the pandemic has revealed that the regions themselves, regional areas, have suffered more than the cities, as you guys well and truly know. This is what it looks like when you analyse the Department of Housing bond lodgements from 2000. Can see that in all three municipalities, the supply has really dried up for affordable housing. Over this time, we have seen housing and property investment really take off, and the match that lit that fuse was the halving of the capital gains tax in 1999. That supposedly the world's greatest treasurer, Peter Costello, implemented. So here's a friendly face. We all watch him, all dream of living in a house, and it's great to see that people on the inside of the property game recognise that just owning a piece of paper that defines you having ownership over some of this scarce earth, holding that for a few years and then selling it, that's an immoral form of income. And in economics, it's technically known as an unearned income because no productive value was created through that ownership process. So this is particularly for someone who owns a vacant block of land and just sits on it for 3/30 years. The town that I live near, Malmesbury, is a land banker's paradise. And you just drive down the middle of town there and you'll see vacant block after vacant block. But luckily now we've got an expansion in the vacant residential land tax and a closure of some of those tax loopholes for land taxes. Some of those sites are starting to go up for sale. So it's good. It feels like all these budget submissions and government inquiries and crazy geekathon sessions are starting to help. This week we also saw this news story in The Guardian. We've all heard of build to rent. I mean, most of you heard of that concept? No, not really. Well, it's another one of the property lobby's policy balloons. They're sort of hanging the hat on, believing that if we allow big corporations to come and build apartment blocks, they will rent it to us long term, and this added supply will push down rental prices. I was in Detroit, LA, San Francisco, seeing what was happening in the 2014 to 2017 period, and it was horrific seeing hearing stories of people talking about the facial recognition technology when they walked into their apartment in Brooklyn that had heat scanning technology embedded in the walls. They were renting on an app, and they'd be able to lodge a leaky tap problem on their app, but that would get registered on the database, and every 6 months they were facing rent increases. So I was out there warning about this. We had Samantha Ratnam from the Greens present an addendum to the build to rent legislation when it was put through, and of course it got laughed out. But just 12 months after this apartment block opened up, a third of residents were either evicted or faced rental increases of 9 to 17%. So they wanted to have this turnover so they could bring in new residents at a higher lease charge. So rent has become an entry price to life on earth. So how do we try and rebalance that out? That's where the community land trust model comes in, because in a way it's setting up a system that shields some land from the speculative market, and it's locally accountable because it's run by locals. We have a board, we know who's on that board, and who knows, a small town like Daylesford, you might bump into someone on the board and be able to ask them those questions. But getting a notification on an app from some big multinational company telling you that your rent's increased, you don't get much buy-in on that. So it's a community-controlled housing vehicle that importantly is set up to ensure not just affordability for one generation of buyers, but perpetually. And we've got history now, 50 years of community land trust history in America, and more in various other models, so that, we're confident that this model will work over the long run. And we do this by really focusing in on the economics of it all. So this is the key slide, understanding what a CLT is. The land trust manages that land, but you as the resident only has to borrow for the house. So when you think about the average mortgage, 2/3 of it is the land component, 1/3 is the house. So under the present system, we pay interest on the land to banks for 30 years. How can we channel that interest payment away from the banking system, away from the established corridors of power, and loop it back into the community so that it becomes a self-funding vehicle? So that's really one of the key points. And the important bit about separating that land from the building is that when housing prices go up, it's really the land price. And so all the way through current economic theory and everyday language, we're sort of given these diversions that occur. And so, one of my little sayings is, you can't see the forest for the trees. Well, you can't see the land for the houses. It's the same thing. So if we zero in on the land and make sure we've got a razor focus on that, we can really influence what happens with housing affordability. And that's why I ask, why is location such a big thing in real estate, but in economics it's all but ignored? And that was the big change from classical to neoclassical economics. When I started my first week of my economics degree, they said output equals labour plus capital. Virtually my last economic lesson, they said, sorry, output does not equal labour plus capital, and we don't know why. Then I go and study and get further in the detail. The reason why labour and capital doesn't equal output is because it ignores the earth, and land represents the earth, all of our natural resources. So, it was great to get Professor John Freeban admit that was what it was on my Renegade Economist podcast years ago. So the benefits of a CLT. Talked a bit about channeling those housing payments, some of them away from the banks and back towards community. We're looking at a deposit that's about a third of the size. So that's one of the biggest hurdles people have these days, is saving up. You know, in Daylesford at the moment, prices are $900,000. So, you know, you need about $185,000 just as a deposit. And I'm sure most of you could remember back 15, 20 years ago, you would have almost bought a house in Daylesford for that price. I can see people nodding. So, yeah, there's lower overall housing costs, and we're coming together as an intentional community to try and work to make life easier for each other. So, you know, we all hear the stories of bulk buying, of childcare, sharing, community gardens, all those great things. That's what we can do. So the big one that really gets me excited, though, is that in time we'll figure out how much of your housing payments you're making to the trust are funding a new home for someone else. And that's the thing that this really does, is it helps your necessary housing payments go towards helping someone just like you to find refuge from this speculative juggernaut that is tearing communities apart. So how do we share these profits? We've got a monthly land lease fee, which is based on the site valuation the council does every year, so it's very transparent. And then when you go to sell, there's a capital gains like tax that you share back with the community. So you get some of that, but not all of it. And on top of that, we have an affordability lock in place, which is a legal caveat that the home cannot be sold for more than 30% of the median income multiplied over 20 years. So that triple effect puts a lot of signals out to the market to say, look, you know, this is not the sort of housing you want to come and buy and try and flip. In fact, you're not allowed to do that. You can have bylaws in place to ensure that the house is occupied for at least 6 months of the year. So we have signals to the marketplace that this is for community, not for profit. So this is the current housing story. Up the top there, investors buy up properties, prices increase. Often those investors are basically taught how to, you know, I go to some crazy seminars. I go to this one called Tax Minimisation for Lawyers. It's great undercover detective work, and I come out of there with steam coming out of my ears, but I learned so many things. But they actually teach you how to spy on someone wearing tie-dye pants and wearing dreads, real funksters. And it's your job to go and listen to them in the cafe, and it's your job to figure out where they're going to go move to next, and it's your job to go and buy there and wait. And the crowd goes, whoa. And I'm like, no way, this can't be true. This is a movie scene. But that's what this little guy does, running up and down in front of all of the legal books behind him. And he's got his routine down pat, and this is what goes on all around the world. And now they use Google Earth and various software programs to really understand the demographic trends, so they know where people are moving. Where's Banksy done his latest piece of graffiti? Property prices. It's amazing. Cafe rents near Banksy's artwork go up. So even Banksy works for the property lobby. So each time a property is sold, those profits leave the community. And gee, it would be fascinating to see what's happening here in Daylesford. And I'd love to see what's happening in Castlemaine. All of these communities that are cultural hotspots. Colleagues of mine in Pennsylvania are doing that study and seeing how much money leaves their community and heads to richer shores. And here we are in the beautiful Daylesford Senior Citizen Centre. And, you can tell we need some more money in this community. How do we get a share of this real estate bonanza? Unfortunately, our public finance system has been torn to shreds, and we're trampling all over it, and people are actually hate it. They've been taught to hate the system that should be helping protect their community. A CLT is a minor version of this bigger story I've been working on. So at the moment, people are being displaced. As you know, lots of illegal buildings are coming up here, there and everywhere. People struggling through winter in leaky tin sheds. God knows, it's crazy what's going on. Meanwhile, no one's counting all of the vacant land and all of the vacant houses. That's what I've spent, most of the last 20 years doing, is quantifying vacancy. And it's usually 3 times what they tell us is out there in the press. So, we're living in a housing supply crisis, but government doesn't count how many vacancies are out there. So no wonder I'm bald. With the CLT process, the resident owns the house, the CLT owns the land. The resale formula, the land lease, keeps a cap on those prices, and deposits and mortgage payments are reduced by 30% plus. And over time, we can save up some money so that we can build more homes. So it's a powerful way for a community to share in just some of this real estate bonanza that we see on our TV each and every week with one of those goddamn real estate shows. Here's another infographic trying to break this down. Imagine if you're the second generation. It makes it a bit easier to understand this graphic if you look at this from you're the second person to buy into the community, and we expect you'll purchase at around about 70% of the current market value. You can see the lease of the land. When you sell, the profit is shared, and over time that kitty grows, and from that, community standards, community well-being improves. So the governance, I know this is what gets you excited, but we've got to get into this stuff because we've got to, if we do get a land trust up, we've got to make sure that we can hold this land for not just 10 or 20 years, but 70, 100, 200 years. If we get this right, this could be the sort of thing that is still here in the climate challenge future. So The CLT model sees that we split the board into thirds so that essentially the residents can't stack the board and get rid of the affordable housing levers that are in place. So we have 1/3 residents, 1/3 neighbours, and then 1/3 retired academics, counsellors, people who care, who have public policy sort of insights, maybe the grant writers. We all love grant writers, don't we? So we can manage this community infrastructure wisely into the future. So within that, we need to focus on the Constitution. I'm really going to be pushing to expand the base of affordable housing as a key driver of this community. I've seen an amazing land colony in America in Fairhope, Alabama, and actually it was in Arden, Delaware, and they paid off their debts in about 10 years and became a beautiful nudist art colony. Amazing place to visit, but did they really expand upon the privilege they had of establishing that land so that other people could also benefit from it? It feels like we need to ensure that land trusts don't become what's known as an enclave. And this is one of the criticisms of the CLT movement. People get in there and they go, great, I'm safe, see you later. They do their good things within there, but it's not, there's not a great drive to really help others. They do in part, but how do you have the financial mechanisms in place, the real drivers to keep things rolling? It's getting warm in here. We can do things. We've got to make sure we establish the bylaws. Cats and dogs and things like that. It's all right. The heater's off. I think we'll be okay now. I've seen a lot of groups come together. You will probably seen various intentional communities come together and they buy the land, but they don't have a clue on what the financial model is, don't really figure out what's going to happen when someone wants to leave. There's debates over wildlife corridors. Do we have cats? Do we have dogs? Do we love our kangaroos? What's the priority? And a lot of tension sort of builds up in that sort of space. So at Grounded, we're really trying hard to make sure we have the best in the economic front, the environmental, the legal, the built form, and of course, social side as well. So what could happen if we had a place well established? Imagine the fruit trees that you could have going. I love having our annual biochar burn at our place. What sort of regular community actions will you be involved in? I'm still trying to think of something cooler than our buddy Mitch, who lives in the Grampians, who has this amazing swinging bath. What would be the centerpiece of your community? He's got this convection fire and it gravity feeds down hot water into the bath, beautiful view over the valley, and you're sitting there swinging and there's kids pushing you and giant big metal cables holding you up above the ground. And it's like, how good is this life? What could we do if we thought about it? If we had time and land where we can actually dream big. So we tried to dream big a couple of months ago when the council had their affordable housing forum in the next room in the town hall here. And I was very happy to see that out of the 20 odd various proposals that were put up, that innovative housing models was the most popular, number one voted focus for the council's housing affordability policy. So can we do this here? We're meeting council's housing strategy objectives. We have this progressive culture here. We have a dramatic and urgent need for affordable housing. But my God, goddamn land prices, they're so damn ridiculous here. We could get the same piece of land in Malmesbury for half the price. No, but I'd love to do something here in Daylesford. My God, where is she? Megan Gale, you are meant to be here. I invited some of those top league Airbnb pirates to come to this meeting because I wanted them to introduce us to their wealthy friends. Darn, I was sure she'd be here. I'm sure you're on Zoom, Megan. We'll talk later. But yeah, the banking sector is a bit of a challenge. It's good though. So many generations of co-ops and various co-housing. This community-led housing movement is starting to grow, and they're recognising that relying on property developers, we're getting shitty homes, poorly built, bad environmental design, boring, and we can do better. So, we've got to really learn how to change this culture of living together. That's our big one, isn't it? I haven't got all the answers to that one yet. I don't know anyone who does, but if we can be humble and try and work towards that sort of improvement, I'm sure we're all going to be better for it. So, the numbers. Let's do a quick few slides on numbers. We're about 2/3 of the way through. So this is what it looks like in graphical form. I said 900,000 is the median price here in Daylesford now, but if we looked at 60% of the median, imagine if you could find a place for around about $540,000. Don't know if you've looked online at the moment, but that's a pretty big ask. There's not many properties around there, but that's the blue bar. In red is 80%, probably more likely, but who's going to have 720K? The yellow renter, you can see down the bottom in green is the CLT land lease, and then in orange in between is the CLT total. So that orange line, you're saving around about $8,000 on the 60% line. So it's a reasonable saving. Let's look at that in a few different other formats. So over 10 years, which is the average length of tenure now, compared to someone paying a mortgage on a full market price, you're $313,000 ahead. So that is significant. At 80%, 205, 60%, about 100 grand. And the poor old renter, you're about 124K in front. So, it does stack up economically. And if we look at these various housing options as a percentage of that total cost, you can see the CLT total in dark blue there is at 12%. Whereas the median full price is more than double. Even at 80%, it's about double that. So it is a saving. Now, look at the interest savings. This is a really important one. If you're buying a $600,000 home, you're paying $618,000 in interest, whereas for a CLT, I'm estimating we're going to build homes for about 240K out here. It's not going to be glamorous. There will be sweat equity. We can build glamour into it that way, but you're only paying 247K. So about $372,000 saving in interest. So it's significant when you don't have to pay interest on the land component. And if we do it right and get tax deductibility in place under a public beneficent institution rating, we can avoid paying stamp duty as well. So there's another 35K. But what's the catch? You don't get all the cream. You've got to share that. But that's part of this move towards custodianship. We can't think we own the earth. I mean, how crazy is it? It's been ripped apart and pillaged basically because it's been a free-for-all. So it's catching up with us, isn't it? And I think it's time we showed some leadership when all of this sprawl, all of these forests that are being knocked down is under the pretense of more supply pushing down prices. But as my research shows, they say they're going to push prices down, but when you peer behind and look what they're doing, they doctor it so that prices only go up. It's horrific. Okay, so the benefits. We've talked about 1/3 of a typical deposit, a typical mortgage deposit. We've just seen the savings over a 10-year tenure. We've got an exit pathway in place with a combination of some of those capital gains and some of those savings so that we can enter the open market or go and join another community. It's really important we have that pathway in place. We have community-led housing design, so we get the sort of homes we want built for us because we've been at the meetings, we've seen the products they're going to use, we've seen the sort of design philosophy behind it, and bang, it's great. There's care in that process. And hopefully people see it as being a benefit in showing leadership, in changing this culture away from, this is mine, to, hey, isn't this ours? So here we are in Daylesford. What you can do to help? Find us an ethical landholder. It's what we need. Someone who will perhaps donate the land or come to us and say, look, we want to put it on the market, but we hear what you're doing and we'd love to be able to sell it to you direct. And by doing that, brings the heat out of the market, and hopefully we can meet somewhere between what we want and what the market would deliver, and there's some sort of saving for that community. Because one of the most important things when you're setting up a land trust is not to put the trust into too much debt to begin with. That's what happened with new communities who were the first land trust in America, an African American farming land trust. An amazing story they went through. So if we get to that stage, let's start building. Let's get on with it. So our next steps, we're going to have Vasco talk about village design on December 7. And hopefully between now and then, we're going to find some people who are really interested in this and join Deborah and Vasco and myself. Have been meeting for around about 6 months, talking all this through. We need a name. You know, we're really at the beginning. So the basics are here. Luckily, we have one philanthropist who's going to help us get the ball rolling. But we need it, you know. Couple more would be nice, wouldn't it? So it's really important we can make those connections with builders, with plumbers, architects. You know, the community is amazing. I wonder what hidden resources you have near you in your network. I've got a guy with 5 acres of former jetty timber just sitting in his yard. Amazing. Sort of cross-beam material. Wonder what other people have. So yeah, there we go. You know, we love looking at beautiful homes, don't we? We love that feeling. You know, it should be something that represents freedom. We can have a safe place, a place where we can invite our family, our friends to, a place where we can meet new people. And we can do that without this incredible financial straitjacket driving us to conform. And that's one of the most powerful reasons we have these $1 million mortgages, is that it pulls out all that creativity out of culture, out of society. So that's what we need as we move towards this approach that hopefully encourages this custodianship, this approach to sharing the earth rather than hoarding it, towards, making people recognize that working together is much better than someone thinking that private profit is good for society. I mean, we've gone from a world where we didn't have enough things, and in a way, some of that entrepreneurial spirit was driven by that private profit motive, but now we've got too much stuff and not enough environment. So we need to rebalance that out, and by pulling the heat out of the real estate game, it will slow that treadmill down so we can all stop and look and smell the roses again. So there we go. Any questions? Questions to the mic, thanks. So our friends on Zoom, whoa, wake up too much.
Shall I start?
Yeah, good, thank you.
I've got a question. It's great to see that mortgage prices would be so much lower, or mortgage amounts, and it's not something that scares the pants out of us. What I want to ask is, what do you think the likelihood of banks accepting on those would be? Because my understanding of company share title, which like banks won't, because they don't actually get the land title in that mortgage, they won't touch it.
Yep.
So how does that change in this scenario?
Yeah, that's the nub of it all, isn't it? But yeah, I have it on good faith that there's about a dozen of the second tier banks that are interested in lending to land trusts. And ANZ's been making some great noises as well. But in, of course, America, Fannie Mae, the government lending facility, actually has an FAQ on community land trusts, and they actively lend to land trusts because of exactly that point, that the mortgage overhead is so much lower that the what's called the loan to value ratio is of such a low risk that they're willing to support it. And the second piece of evidence that goes towards encouraging that was during the global financial crisis, the rate of foreclosure was 80% lower in CLTs than it was in the wider community. So there's two factors there that are lower risk, and that second factor is because with a land trust, you really want to try and have financial literacy on your board and a financial planner, accountant, someone like that. And the way we do it to minimize risk is that everyone's mortgage payments goes through the trust and then to the bank. And that gives the trust an insight if someone's falling behind on their payments, and then the community can get around them and try and help them figure out what's going on so that it further reduces those banking pressures. But yeah, that's the big one. But hopefully those factors are going to build up. And, when it comes to impact investment, everyone knows that housing is such a key point now. So we've had some very interesting meetings with what was called NIFIC. It's now known as Housing Australia, and they're the ones that control first home buyers grants and all of the housing accord that's been released. So yeah, we will keep pushing with them so they come on board to support us. And what Fannie Mae does is they support the loan mortgage insurance. So again, that helps reduce the risk.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. So could you do the mic? Our Zoom friends. How are our Zoom friends going, Matt? Cool.
So I'm a bit confused because it feels to me this is a bit based on status quo, with banks being able to do what they do up to now, insurance companies being able to continue to insure us. In my feeling is that all this is on the way out, it's all failing, and an alternative to bank mortgages must be looked at.
Yeah, well, I'm very interested in fractional lending, and we've all seen crowdfunding, people coming together to lend to support projects. Maybe that's what's going to happen with community land trusts, is we might be able to raise 25% of our project costs from a form of crowdfunding. You've all heard of brick investment, where you buy a brick in a home. It's sort of a small-scale property investment tool. Well, how can we utilise that for the common good? How can people just want to support this, a project like this that is providing genuine affordability in a creative manner?
Some questions from the Zoomers. A question is, can you start a CLT on an existing piece of property, like an existing block of units?
You could, if you had total ownership of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. There was also a question about where you're getting your building costs from, and a question of whether it's actually possible to build a house that cheaply.
We're talking regionally.
Yeah, they sort of say a cheap house would be $350,000. So.
I know it is controversial, that, but one of our board members is from Habitat for Humanity, and he's saying that they're building 2-bedroom homes for $160K. So they're not massive, there's not going to be all the bells and whistles, but they're still 7-star NAITHS rating, sustainable homes. But he talks about really taking time to find those hidden resources that are out there, wasting away in someone's yard. How can we access some of those with some of these, a bit of sweat equity, and we get the job done? So, we'd love to think that modular housing could be part of the solution. Some really interesting things happening in that space. One of our board members is working with an architecture firm in Denmark who are doing incredible things, but it feels like the size of our homes is going to shrink, and getting used to a 45 square 1-bedroom home or a 80 square, 90 square 2-bedroom home. I've heard of a 4-bedroom home that was 104 square metres, so that's pretty small. About half the size of a normal house in today's terms.
The person who asked about the apartment block also said, does it matter what type of title the land has?
Yeah. Well, certainly farm zone, where I am, is a bit difficult. Rural living zone, you've got to still upzone to residential. But yeah, we're really interested looking at what's happening in the UK. They have, in terms of the rural setting we're in here in Hepburnshire, they have something called rural exception sites. And these are sites that may well be farm zoned, but because there's a group of young farmers who are coming together, who are going to build mud brick off the land, their own septic, their own solar battery. They're basically off-grid. It's reducing council infrastructure requirements. because of all this, and they're adding to the local food sovereignty basis, we're going to give them an exception and allow an affordable farming pod to occur here of 4 to 5 homes. And that's what happens. I was watching an amazing little Welsh documentary the other day, and they have a low impact exemption, or a similar thing, all sustainable, locally sourced goods within 20k sort of radius, doing good for the environment. All right, we're going to give them this sort of rural exception sort of approach. So it's kind of hard, I understand, and I'm very interested. I'd love to know if anyone here in the room knows about what's happened in New South Wales with the multiple occupancy laws up there. There used to be 12 municipalities that would allow you to have more than one site on a farm. A lot of communes and whatnot were set up under those regulations, but now there's only 2 municipalities that allow that. And my understanding is that a lot of those communities ended up down dirt roads in the middle of nowhere, chasing cheap land prices, and because they're so far away, that stretched the council's infrastructure costs in terms of roads, in terms of rubbish, power, and so forth. And from that, they've had to shrink that down. So part of what we're doing at Grounded is trying to find the happy medium between what happened, the intent of those policies versus the outcomes that occurred, and how do we find that happy medium? So perhaps there's some sort of change that we allow, rural exception or multiple occupancy to occur within 3 kilometres of a arterial road, something like that. So, we're lucky in Victoria. We have a progressive government. They are open to this sort of feedback, and I'm feeling, pretty good, having changed 3 tax laws in the last few years. So they are listening. Jen.
Thanks, Karl. Thanks for the presentation. Very inspiring. I have some technical questions.
Good. Hit me.
Look, you mentioned the multiple occupancy thing, and I suppose that would be something you'd really want to get right, is to look at your planning constraints in wherever you are choosing or looking. And have you actually had a chance to talk with planners at Hepburn Shire about some of those possibilities or issues?
Yes, I have. It was all very much kind of, within the code. There wasn't too much wriggle room, but there was support there. There was, good body language. The same thing at Mount Alexander Shire as well. Wanting to help, but we're stuck within the code sort of thing. So those conversations always feed into our sort of budget submissions and lobbying of planning.
Okay, and the current sort of agricultural strategy that we're doing at the moment in Hepburn Shire. So you might want to get a look at that and maybe give some input into that.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to attending my first Sustainable Hepburn Advisory Committee meeting soon. So I'll dial in with Manny on that, so that'll be good.
Look, you're probably aware that there's farm accommodation is allowable for workers on farms that have a certain income, that are businesses, basically a farm business, but they can. I think there's no permit required, or there's some sort of fast tracking of permits for a worker accommodation, and I don't know whether that fits in with the model that you're considering.
Yeah, well, it's 40 hectares and above, I think, so it sort of supports the big landholders again. And I'm keen to find a way that we can apply some critique to this hobby farm mentality, or these 10-acre lots. Why are they prioritised as holiday homes rather than allowing the mid-size farms who can do amazing things with all the latest agricultural tools, farming tools that are out there now? We can do a lot on a 1/4-acre block. So do we really need to have such large farms? And why can't we get more of these affordable farming pods happening, where young farmers can access the land and do good things with it.
So I have a question, Carl. When you go to sell your home, you've got a 25% share comes back to the person selling, 75% goes to the CLT. So there's a two-part question. How did you get to that figure? And I suppose the question's around you talking about you've saved up to build your house, say you can do it for 160,000, but if you sell, you're only going to get 25% of that back. Is that what you're
No,
saying?
you'll get the cost of the house back, but it's the growth on that as well. So
right,
that's
so that
the
in
key.
terms of the house and land package, if you were selling that package, you get the 25%, which is effectively the house.
The house, yeah.
And the land part stays with
the trust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah, it's 25% of the growth. Yeah, the capital growth above the cost of building the home. Yeah.
I see. Yeah. And the third and last question is just around your I suppose the structure or the legal structure of the organisation.
Yep.
Is it a cooperative? Is it a body corporate? Like, what is the legal framework that you're setting up with the board? I understand what the board is, but what's the legal entity?
Good question. Yeah, well, it's a company limited by guarantee, which is virtually the non-profit sort of non-distributional company structure. Yeah, we've got the leading lawyer in the CLT space, Derek Mortimer, as part of our team. We've also got one of the leading planners who's a big supporter of community land trusts as part of our sort of first port of call when you're trying to set one of these up. Keppel, here we go.
Thanks, Carl. This is very low. I was wondering, like you've alluded to the fact that it's quite a popular model overseas in America and the UK and other places, but seems to have not really taken off yet in Australia. And my understanding is there are some kind of, have been some particular obstacles around land laws or something like that. Is that still the case? Has anything shifted that makes it more promising now, or where are things at with that?
Yeah, good question. The banking one has been a big issue, and the part of the challenge there is separating the land from the building. And when it comes to property titles, we have what's called Torrens title, and this is a world-class property titling system that started in South Australia and hasn't really been updated in 140 odd years. So it's about time we updated it, I think. But in Victoria, with the ground lease model that's happened with the privatisation, well, the reinvigoration of 3 or 4 big public housing sites in Flemington, Brighton, and somewhere else over there, and maybe St Kilda, they have done that separation of land from improvements. So now there's legal precedents. The State Treasury got behind those projects, so there's some template work in place. But one of the things we're doing at Grounded is working on what's called a prescribed lease. I know that gets you excited, but that's a new piece of government bureaucracy that's come in place in the last 5 years since an update to the Residential Tenancies Act. And hopefully we're going to get that gazetted through Parliament in the next couple of years. But the fact we've got one in draft form, we can show that to banks. That will show we're serious about this, and hopefully will help gild the lily to get this going.
Great. And one last question is, what else is happening around Australia? Are there any areas where there's any kind of promising projects that are bubbling away that you can tell us about?
Yeah, certainly. Well, with this increased pressure on developers to have inclusionary zoning, where they've got to provide something between 10 to 20% of all their land supply has got to be affordable housing. There's a bit of a push to get CLTs as part of that mix, a bit of a push to get co-housing as well in that sort of structure. So, it feels like there's going to be more and more projects, but one of the ones that's probably the closest is, of course, the Byron Bay Community Land Trust. So, that's being headed up by the guy who founded Splendour in the Grass. Festival promoter up there is also a property developer. So he's doing that. There's people down in Lorne who have got quite a kitty together. They've found a few philanthropists and they've got multiple millions of dollars, and they're trying to set one up which is a whole pile of quarter-acre blocks in different locations. So that's a very interesting development. And I think there's a group of women in the Blue Mountains that are doing some great work as well. So, there is momentum starting to build. But if you want to see what's happening internationally, have a look at the UK CLT network. And they've gone from about 20 to 500 CLTs in the last 15 years, post-GFC. So it's really starting to take off there, and they've had both sides of politics, conservatives and, the progressives, recognising that we can't just rely on trickle-down housing supply. We need to give community some agency to do things themselves.
How do I do that, Carl? Thank you, Carl. Look, Carl, my name's Heather Mutimer, and I'm a former councillor with Hepburn Shire in another life. And during my time on council, I was involved with a project actually in Raglan Street where there's a group of, I think, 4 or 5 units, and council provided land to the Disability Housing Trust. And this was a piece of surplus land that council had, and together with the Disability Housing Trust, I think that, I'm not quite sure, I can't remember if they donated the land or they sold it to the Disability Housing Trust for a very reasonable price. So I'm just asking, have you actually thought of doing that as well, approaching council to see what surplus land they might have, which you could work with them on a project now that they have their affordable housing strategy in place?
Yes, well, I have tried with a few councillors, the former strategic planning director, but apparently there's not that much land available. Went to Macedon Rangers, heard their CEO say, yep, we've identified vacant land. Then I went and met with them and said, oh no, we don't have any vacant land. So we're trying, but I'd love to hear that there is some land here.
They do have a register.
Yeah.
A register would be worth looking at, and I think I might be right, Jen. I saw something advertised where they're asking the community feedback about the sale of assets, of community assets. So it might be really good timing, because sometimes even if you're just talking to the officers casually, they're not even quite sure themselves what's actually there. So maybe through Jen, as a bit of an advocate, you might be able to have a bit of a closer look to see what actually there is there.
Yeah, well, I love that. Thank you. That would be great, because it is something that councils typically haven't really known what land they own, and all sorts of state government agencies and the like, they don't have a very good handle on the land they own. Okay, Matt, this is good.
There was a bit of a conversation on the Zoom chat about whether there's any government funding available for this type of thing, and there was a bit of chit-chat about crowdsourcing funding. And I'll also just follow on so you can answer both of them, whether Grounded has any relationship with Nightingale and the fact that they've had affordable housing, they've built things and they've had affordable housing provisions within that structure.
Yeah, we don't have any relations with Nightingale. Hopefully we'll make some connections there. Deborah, you've got some connections? Yeah, but you know, the fact is there's a group of next generation developers that are coming through, and what I loved when Dan Andrews did announce that housing statement, it was that instead of being next to Mirvac or Stockland or Lendlease, he stood next to Assemble Homes, which at least has a deliberative development model of engaging with their clients and asking them what sort of housing they want. You know, that's a start. So it's a start of, you know, there's a change that's going to come through property, I feel, and hopefully we're going to be one of those groups that helps really push it towards recognising, not just the built form, but also the economic levers that sit beneath it, so that we go through all this work to do a development. We're not just going to make it work for one generation of owners, we're going to make it for everyone who lives in this place, and everyone who does live there is going to go towards funding the next one. Little bit at a time. Next hard-hitting question, here we go.
So I'd like to know, why focus on the new when there is abundant housing around that is unoccupied, and that many beds have been identified as being empty? I think it was over 3 million rooms are empty in Victoria. Because just let me finish though, because in effect we're looking at the degradation of land all the time, and the further we move rurally with the declining economy, the more remote people are going to be, and at the present time people are requiring more services. So I think we really need a very big behaviour change and scale down in what we're used to and what our expectations are. So is there a possibility of doing CLT for existing stock of housing in townships where it's walkable?
Yes, the problem we have though with these spare bedrooms is that the property owner generally wants to hang on to that location, and so it's more an issue of tax reform. My past role at Prosper Australia was about reforming those vacancy taxes and putting a little hot potato in the lap of those property owners living in one person in a 4-bedroom home, a Ratley home. So it's about changing those financial incentives so that it encourages them to either sell up or rent out those rooms and find a way to do that. So it's a hard one. As I said, the people in Apollo Bay are trying to do that though with the existing homes within the township boundary, and there's no reason why that couldn't be done. So it's really up to the potentials of that committee of that township, what they can actually afford, what's realistic and what fits within their time frame. But yeah, I can't wait to see what we're doing with hemp building in another 5 to 10 years. There's so many good things coming through. It feels like there's all sorts of innovation that's happening. So it's going to be very interesting.
There's just a couple more questions. One is, you mentioned the prescribed lease. Does that mean until that is official that you can't split the land and the house on the title?
No, you already can. Because of that ground lease model, it has set the precedent to enable that. But this will just provide more certainty for the bank, for the finance sector to see an established formula that's been signed off by government. That stamp of approval will help the banks become more familiar with the model and be more willing to approve it.
Well, one last one from the Zooms. What about leasing DECA, D-E-E-C-A land? Would that work? Could a CLT, the CLT wouldn't own the land, but the rest of the model might work, and there's tons of DECA land.
What is DECA land?
I don't know.
Crown? Right. Department of Name Changes. I like that, Vasco. Yeah. Well, I can't see why that couldn't be possible. And one of the things I would like to see is local councils who are facing revenue shortfalls with rate capping. There's lots of challenges for councils to meet all of these service requirements that are coming through, and some of them do have this vacant land. So why couldn't they develop a relationship with the Community Land Trust, lease that land out, save the land trust having to borrow all that money? The council earns a revenue stream from that leasehold, and we solve two problems at once. So there's a lot of potential with government land, and it works on their balance sheets too. They get the revenue bonus and they keep it on their balance sheets. So it'll put a real art into that ancient practice of peppercorn leases.
Another question is about the kind of area that is best suited, or where there's the kind of best opportunity for a CLT to be established. And I guess reflecting on what's on the experience of overseas, is it easier to get one off the ground in an area which is less, where land prices are less kind of exorbitant than they are here, or is it more about the amount of kind of interest in the community and where there's money, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, generally it has been the rural locations with lower land prices has been where it's begun, and then as those relationships with banks, with planning, the legal structure, as that's all built in scale, they move closer into the city, where those established relationships with philanthropists and the finance sector can see this occur. I didn't point out in the presentation, but one of the advantages of this model is that it's, in a way, a public-private relationship, and for government who are interested in affordable housing, if they own the land and the residents are borrowing for their mortgage, government can get a lot more return for their time and investment, because the residents are also contributing. And, we can get better return on investment for government if they can smarten up a few laws to help us move towards the commons.
So following on from that, and reflecting on that slide earlier where you were looking at the areas in Victoria, regional Victoria, where there's been the most increase in property prices, is there any kind of advantage in focusing attention on the places where it isn't so high regionally? Like, I noticed Goldfields Shire was pretty relatively low compared with property price increases compared with around here, but obviously you'd need people there that want to do it. Is that something you've explored?
Yeah, it really just depends on where you can find that, part culture, part land access. And this time last week, I think it was, there was a community-led housing forum in Castlemaine I was at, and had 5 RSVPs on Facebook, and I was like, oh God, what's going to happen? And there was 70 people crammed into the room. We broke into groups of 6 or 7 towards the end of the night, and my group, all 6 of us owned land and wanted to do something positive. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I hope that happens next week in Daylesford. So who knows? We'll meet some people out of this, it'll be great. But it feels like we're kind of answered plenty of questions, Matt. We're all done on Zoom. We said we'd wrap this up about 8:30. So, we've got I think we've got some wine, we've got some bickies, some cheese. So hang around and have a chat, and let's see how we can move forward. We talked about December 7 earlier. So yeah, Vasco's fired up to, you know, he and Deborah, who I met basically through the Middleton development here at Womback Park, and their great work, sort of Deborah in particular, in blocking the block. Yeah, give them a round of applause. Yeah, so, and I remember seeing the master planned design that the developers had, and then comparing it to the one that Vasco had done, and I was like, oh, God, we could do so much better. If we're going to sprawl, you know, we could do so much better. We've got all these vacant blocks in town. How do we use them for CLTs? The same thing applies. So anyway, thanks for your attention. Let's hope we can get this ball rolling and start to give people in Daylesford, in Hepburn Shire, some hope that there are alternatives to just waiting for the top end of town to deliver something for them. So thank you. And maybe we turn these bright lights on.